I thought I was merely dog-sitting for 2 weeks. But I had unknowingly inherited my daughter's most toxic secret. While I escaped to the Maldives to treat myself, the truth she tried to bury rose with the tide. When she returned, demanding her place as the dutiful child to secure my money, I was ready. They expected a welcome home dinner, but I had prepared a public execution of their lies. My name is Evelyn Hart. At 57 years old, I had finally constructed a life that operated with the precision of a Swiss watch, living alone in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Providence Hills. I had made peace with the silence that settled over the house after my husband passed. I did not view my solitude as an affliction. I viewed it as order. My days were governed by a strict calendar and my work as a risk coordinator for Kerridge and Blythe Consulting. I spent 40 hours a week identifying liabilities in corporate mergers, and in the mornings, I walked the perimeter of the lake, breathing in the cold air that smelled of pine and discipline. I liked my life predictable. Then my daughter arrived, Lila Grant, 33 years old, and dressed in a travel outfit that likely cost more than my first car, appeared on my doorstep without a warning phone call. She wore a smile that was sugary sweet, but her eyes were cold, scanning past me into the foyer as if she were appraising the furniture. "Mom, God. You are a lifesaver," Lila said, breezing past me before I could even unlatch the storm door fully. She was not alone. Beside her stood a golden retriever mix with soulful, anxious eyes. Lila dropped the leash into my hand and immediately turned back to the driveway to haul out 3 massive suitcases. She set them down on my porch with a heavy thud, treating the luggage with more care than she had greeted me. "We are heading to the coast," she announced, checking her watch. "Just a few weeks. Trent needs a break. And honestly, so do I. We can't take Marlo. The hotel has a strict policy. She did not ask if I was busy. She did not ask if I wanted a dog. She simply deposited the animal and the burden at my feet. Lila, I work full-time," I said, looking down at the dog. He sat on my welcome mat, trembling slightly. "You cannot just drop him off." "Oh, please. He sleeps all day. He is easy," she snapped, the sweetness evaporating instantly. She reached into her designer tote and pulled out a thin, white envelope. She shoved it into my hand. "Here. Instructions. Feeding times. Allergies. That sort of thing." I looked at the dog's neck. The leather collar was brand new, stiff and unweathered. There was no metal tag jingling against the buckle. No name. No phone number. "Where is his tag?" I asked. "We got him a new collar for the trip, and the tag hasn't arrived yet," she said, her voice tight. She was already backing toward her car. "The microchip is being updated. It is pending in the system, so don't worry about it." She opened the car door, then paused, looking back at me with a gaze that was sharp and calculating. "Mom, listen. If he gets sick, which he won't, don't take him to your vet. Use the emergency clinic listed in the note. Your guy is too expensive and old-fashioned. My vet has treated our animals for 20 years, I argued. "Just do as I say." "Okay," she said, slamming the car door. "I have to go. Love you." She drove away, leaving me standing in the cold with a dog I did not know and a daughter I barely recognized. That night, the house felt different. The silence was broken by the rhythmic clicking of claws on the hardwood. Marlo was a gentle soul, but he was restless. Around 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of him whimpering in the hallway. I knelt beside him, running my hands over his flank, and he flinched when I touched his left leg. I turned on the hall light. There was a nasty scratch on his leg, red and irritated, hidden beneath the fur. It was not fresh, but it was clearly painful. I looked at the envelope Lila had left. Don't take him to your vet. I have spent my career analyzing risk. When someone tells you specifically not to look in a certain direction, that is exactly where you must look. I put on my coat. 30 minutes later, I was standing under the fluorescent hum of Harbour Light Animal Care. The night shift veterinarian, Dr. Aris, hummed as he cleaned the wound. He is a sweet boy, Dr. Aris said. I'll just scan his chip to pull up his medical history. You said Lila dropped him off. Yes, I said, watching his hands. He ran the scanner over Marlowe's neck. The device beeped. Dr. Aris looked at the screen, then frowned. He tapped a few keys and looked again. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Evelyn, Dr. Aris said, his voice dropping to a serious, confused tone. You said this is your daughter's dog. That is what she told me. He turned the monitor so I could see it. According to the National Registry, this chip isn't pending update. It was registered 4 days ago, but the owner listed isn't Lila Grant, and it isn't Trent. Who is it? I asked, feeling a cold prickle of dread at the base of my neck. The registered owner is Apex Fidelity Collateral Trust. Dr. Aris read, looking up at me over his glasses. Evelyn, why is your daughter's dog registered to a financial institution? The drive back from the clinic was suffocating. Marlowe sat in the passenger seat, his head resting heavily on his paws. But my mind was miles away, dissecting the last decade of my life. My relationship with Lila had not shattered all at once. It had eroded, like a cliff face battered by a relentless sea. There were the birthdays she forgot, the holidays she skipped because they were too stressful, and the phone calls that only came when she needed a signature or a loan. I realized that for years, I had been less of a mother to her and more of a safety net she resented having to use. I gripped the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. I remembered the day I sold my first home, the one with the oak tree in the front yard, where Lila learned to ride a bike. My husband had been dying, and the medical bills were a rising tide that threatened to drown us. I liquidated everything to give him 6 more months of dignity. I learned then that money is not just currency. It is blood. When you bleed for someone, you expect loyalty. But Lila seemed to believe my sacrifices were simply the baseline of her existence. Then there was Trent Grant, 36 years old, a real estate broker who wore suits that were too shiny and smiles that were too practiced. He always treated me with a rehearsed politeness, like an actor reading lines from a script he did not quite understand. He would ask about my garden or my job, but his eyes would glaze over the moment I started speaking. I always felt that he was assessing my value, calculating my worth in the same way he appraised a distressed property. When we got home, I settled Marlowe into the living room and checked my laptop. The screen glowed with a notification from Kerridge and Blythe. It was the confirmation I had been waiting for. My report on the supply chain discrepancies had been verified, and the board had approved a performance bonus. It was a substantial sum, enough to pay off my car and pad my retirement significantly. The email stated the funds would hit my account in 10 days. I sat back, letting the relief wash over me, but the peace was shattered a moment later by the buzz of my phone. It was a text from Lila. Hey Mom, just landed. Signal is spotty. Hope Marlowe isn't being a pain. Quick question. Do you still use that old checking account at Stone Harbour Bank? The one with the dual access. I stared at the screen. She had not asked how I was. She had not asked about her dog's health. She had asked about a bank account I had not used in 5 years, an account she technically still had authorized access to from her college days. The timing was too sharp to be a coincidence. The bonus notification, the sudden trip, the dog dumping, the instruction not to see a vet. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up the envelope she had left. I pulled out the single sheet of paper, the care instructions she had thrust at me. I read it again, ignoring the feeding times, and looked at the bottom of the page. In a font size so small, it looked like a printing error. There was a footer in case of custodial incident. Contact Asset Recovery Services immediately at the number below, reference case 449B. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This was not a vacation. This was a setup. They needed me distracted. They needed me compliant. And they needed access to an account they thought would soon be flush with cash. They were not asking for help. They were positioning themselves to take it. I did not reply to the text. I placed the phone face down. I knew that if I confronted them now, they would spin a web of gaslighting so dense I would doubt my own sanity. I had to be still. I had to be the prey that plays dead until the predator gets close enough to bite. My phone rang again. It was Dr. Eris from the clinic. "Evelyn?" he said, his voice hesitant. "I did what you asked." I looked deeper into the transfer logs for the microchip. "I thought you needed to know the timeline." "Tell me," I said. "The dog was registered to Lila Hart for 3 years," Dr. Eris said. "But 2 months ago, the ownership didn't just lapse. It was legally transferred. The registrant was changed from Lila Hart to the Grant Family Trust. And Evelyn, trusts don't usually own family pets unless the animal is listed as a movable asset in a bankruptcy or a collateral agreement." I looked at Marlowe, who was sleeping peacefully on the rug, unaware that he was no longer a dog, but a line item in a ledger of bad debts. "Thank you, Doctor," I said softly. "You have been very helpful." I hung up. They had turned a living creature into collateral, and they were about to find out that they had left him with the one person who knew exactly how to audit a lie. The next morning, I did not go to the office. Instead, I sat in the leather chair across from Nora Whitfield. Nora was 59 years old, a woman who wore her greying hair like a crown of steel wool and possessed a smile that could strip paint. As a senior partner at Whitfield and Kane, she specialized in protecting seniors from financial exploitation, a field that was tragically booming. "You need to start a log." "Evelyn," Nora said, tapping a manicured fingernail on her mahogany desk. "Every text, every call, every time they show up unannounced. And listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything, not a birthday card, not a delivery slip, and certainly not any temporary guardianship papers for that dog." I nodded, feeling a heavy stone settle in my stomach. Nora leaned forward, her voice dropping. "They are testing the perimeter." "Evelyn? If you show weakness, they will breach the walls." I took her advice literally. That afternoon, I installed 3 high-definition security cameras inside my home. I placed one on the bookshelf in the living room, disguised as a router, one in the kitchen, and one facing the front hallway. If anyone asked, I had a perfectly reasonable explanation prepared. I needed to monitor Marlowe while I was at work. In reality, I was preparing to monitor the people who claimed to love me. Once the system was live, I decided to test the waters. I dialed Trent's number. He answered on the first ring. which was uncharacteristic for a man who usually let my calls go to voicemail. Evelyn. Everything okay? His voice boomed, overly cheerful. Background noise suggested a busy hotel lobby, not a beach. I am fine. Trent, I said, keeping my voice level. I just wanted to check in. How is Palm Cove? Oh, it is paradise. Just beautiful, he said, though he sounded distracted. Listen, is Marlowe settling in? Is he moving okay? No issues with his legs? I paused. I had not told them about the scratch on Marlowe's leg or the limp. I had not told them about the vet visit. He is sleeping a lot, I said, evading the question. Why do you ask? Oh, just he is getting old. Just worried about the old guy. He hung up quickly after that, claiming they had a dinner reservation. I stared at the phone. He knew about the leg. They were waiting for a medical crisis. They were waiting for me to call in a panic, begging for help, or perhaps waiting for me to rack up a bill I could not pay. An hour later, my cell phone rang again. This time, it was a local number. A woman from Stone Harbour Bank introduced herself as a senior account manager, Mrs. Hart. I am calling to verify a request we just received via our online portal, she said. We have a pending application to add a secondary signer to your checking account. The reason listed is assistive family management. Did you authorize this? My hand tightened around the phone. I certainly did not. Cancel that request immediately and flag the account for fraud. Understood. We will lock it down. I barely had time to set the phone on the counter before it lit up with Lila's face. She was calling me, not 3 minutes after the bank rejected the request. The coordination was clumsy, desperate. I answered, Mom. Her voice was tight, trembling with a mix of anxiety and manufactured outrage. Did you just lock the account? I was trying to transfer some emergency funds for Marlowe just in case, and it got blocked. Don't you trust me? I walked into the living room, looking at the camera I had just hidden on the shelf. I was recording this. Lila, I said, my voice cold. Why would you need access to my account to pay for your dog? Because I didn't want you to be burdened, she stammered. God, you are so difficult. We are trying to help you. Help me. I asked. Is that why Marlowe is registered to a corporate trust? I spoke to the vet. Lila. I know about the Grant Family Trust. There was silence on the other end. 1 second. 2 seconds. It was the silence of a liar scrambling for a foothold. You are being paranoid, she finally snapped, her tone shifting from concern to venom. You are old, and you are confused. We will talk about this when I get back. She hung up. I stood there, shaking slightly, not from fear, but from rage. My computer chimed with an email from Nora. The subject line was simply urgent. I opened the attachment. It was a screenshot from the local court's filing system. Evelyn. Nora had written. My clerk found this in the pending intake queue. It hasn't been processed yet, but it was uploaded this morning by a paralegal who works at Trent's firm. I looked at the document. It was a draft petition for a declaration of diminishing capacity. It claimed that Evelyn Hart was suffering from early onset memory loss and financial mismanagement, and it requested that immediate power of attorney be granted to her next of kin. They were not just trying to steal my money, they were trying to erase me. They arrived 3 days ahead of schedule. There was no warning call, just the crunch of tires on gravel and the heavy thud of car doors. I watched from the window as Lila and Trent walked up the driveway. They were alone. The children were notably absent, likely dropped off at a friend's house to ensure there were no distractions for whatever ambush they had planned. They carried a gift basket wrapped in excessive cellophane and a thick leather portfolio that Trent clutched against his chest like a shield. They did not knock. They simply used the spare key Lila had refused to return years ago. "Mum, we are home," Lila called out, her voice bright and artificial. I met them in the foyer. Trent immediately began scanning the room, his eyes lingering on the high ceilings and the crown moulding. It was not a look of appreciation, it was an appraisal. "Evelyn." "You look tired," Trent said, bypassing a greeting to offer a critique. He walked into the living room, running a hand along the back of my sofa. "You know, this house is massive. It really is too much space for one person to maintain. Don't you feel swallowed up in here?" Lila set the basket on the coffee table. It contained generic soaps and a candle that smelled of desperation. "We have been talking, Mom," Lila said, sitting down and patting the cushion beside her. "We think it is best if we stay here for a few months, just to help out. You are getting older, and with that big bonus coming in, you will need help managing the tax implications and the investments." I stood by the fireplace, keeping my distance. It was time to play the role they had written for me. I let my shoulders slump slightly and put a hand to my forehead. I suppose I have been feeling a bit overwhelmed," I said, intentionally making my voice sound thin. "I forgot where I put my keys yesterday. Maybe I do need help." Lila exchanged a quick, triumphant look with Trent. It was subtle, but I caught it. "Exactly," Lila said, her voice dropping to a condescending coo. "We just want to protect you. I heard you talking about a trip to the Maldives, Mom. Be serious. You are 57. You have bad knees. Why would you go to an island alone? It is unsafe." While she spoke, her eyes were not on my face. They were darting to my phone, which I had left face up on the side table. She was looking for the passcode. Trent stepped forward, nodding gravely. "Lila is right. Evelyn. Especially with the payout from Kerridge and Blythe hitting on the 12th. That is a significant amount of liquidity to handle without a strategy." I froze internally. I had never told them the date the funds were being released. The email from corporate had only arrived 2 days ago, and I had not shared it with a soul. I didn't realize it was coming that soon. I lied, looking at the floor. I must have missed the email. "I'm going to make some tea," I mumbled, turning toward the kitchen. As soon as I was out of sight, I pulled out my phone, which I had swapped with a dummy unit on the table, and opened the app connected to the living room camera. I put one earbud in. The audio feed was crystal clear. "She is losing it," Lila whispered. "Did you hear her? She doesn't even know the date." "Good," Trent replied, his voice low and urgent. "We need her to sign the power of attorney and the assignment today. If the money hits her account before we have control, she might spend it or move it. If she hesitates, we call the doctor tomorrow and push the capacity hearing. I just want to get this done." Lila hissed. "I can't stand being in this house. It smells like old people." I took a deep breath, removed the earbud, and gripped the counter. They were not here to help. They were here to harvest. I returned to the living room with a tray of empty cups. Marlowe, who had been sleeping in the corner, suddenly stood up. He trotted over to Trent, sniffing intently at the man's suit jacket. "Get away?" Trent muttered, shoving the dog with his knee. But Marlowe did not back down. He barked a sharp, aggressive sound I rarely heard from him. He was fixated on Trent's chest pocket. "Marlowe, stop!" Lila snapped. "He smells something," I said, keeping my voice vague. "He has a very sensitive nose for foreign objects." Trent looked flustered. He adjusted his jacket, and as he did, the interior pocket gaped open. I saw the thick fold of documents he was hiding. It wasn't just a power of attorney. I saw the bold header text on the top page, "Assignment of Claim and Benefits." It was a contract used to transfer the rights of a pending financial payout to a third party. They had printed it out, filled in my name, and were carrying it around in his pocket, waiting for the moment I was confused enough to sign my life away. "Trent," I said, staring at the bulge in his jacket. "What is that paper you have there?" "It looks official." Trent turned pale. He patted his chest, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leaves being crushed. "Oh, this just some work stuff. Nothing you need to worry about. Evelyn, just boring numbers." "I see," I said, watching Marlowe growl low in his throat. "Well, let's have tea. I imagine you have a lot to explain. When my husband died, I learned the most brutal lesson of my life. The people who truly love you will sit with you in the dark when the electricity is cut off because the bills were unpaid. The people who love your utility will only show up when the lights turn back on. For years, I was invisible to my daughter and her husband because I had nothing they wanted. Now that I had risen from the ashes of insolvency, they were suddenly circling like vultures who had smelled fresh meat. I spent the next 48 hours fortifying my life with the cold precision of a military operation. I did not sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, changing the passwords to every single digital account I owned. My email, my retirement fund, my digital locks. Everything was reset to complex strings of characters that not even a guessing algorithm could crack. I contacted the payroll department at Kerridge and Blythe and gave them new instructions. The performance bonus was not to be deposited into my personal checking account. Instead, it would be wired directly to an escrow account controlled by Nora, untouchable by anyone without a court order. Once my financial perimeter was secure, I turned my attention to the dog. I called the veterinary clinic and requested the full metadata on the microchip registration. The Grant Family Trust sounded prestigious, but when I ran the associated tax identification number through a public database, it led to a post office box in Delaware registered to a shell company often used by high-risk debt collectors. I needed professional eyes on this. I hired Miles Hargrove, a 44-year-old private investigator who had spent a decade in corporate security before going freelance. We met in his car parked 2 streets away from my house so the cameras would not spot him. "I need to know who owns that trust," I told him. "And I need to know why my son-in-law is so desperate for cash that he is printing out assignment contracts in his hotel room." Miles worked fast. He called me back 6 hours later. "Evelyn, it is worse than just a cash flow problem," Miles said, his voice flat and professional. "Trent is currently the defendant in a civil lawsuit for inflating sales figures to secure commissions. He owes the firm over $80,000 in clawbacks. If he doesn't pay by the 1st of the month, they are going to press criminal charges for fraud." And Lila, I asked, though I already knew the answer would break my heart. She has maxed out 4 credit cards and has a personal loan with a predatory lender that is about to default. They are drowning. Evelyn, they need your bonus to stay out of jail. I hung up the phone and looked around my silent house. If I stayed here, they would continue to play the role of the loving family, chipping away at my resolve with guilt and feigned affection. I needed them to drop the mask. I needed them to think the castle was unguarded, so they would try to storm the gates. I decided to book the trip to the Maldives. It was no longer a vacation. It was a tactical withdrawal. I booked the flight and the villa at the Azure Vale Atoll under my name, using a new credit card they did not know existed. I hired a house sitter, a retired police officer Nora recommended, who would stay out of sight but keep a perimeter watch. I configured the security cameras to upload footage directly to a cloud server that only Nora and I could access. Before I packed my bags, I sat down and wrote a note on a piece of heavy cardstock. I placed it inside the zippered lining of my suitcase, where only I would find it. It read, "Do not get soft just because they call you Mom. They are not here for you." My phone buzzed again. It was Miles. "One last thing. Evelyn," he said, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I found a pending transaction linked to the trust. It involves the dog. What about Marlowe?" "They aren't just keeping him," Miles said. "They listed him as a specialized asset, high-value breeding stock. They are using the dog as collateral to secure a bridge loan until they can get their hands on your money. If they default, the lender takes the dog." I felt a surge of nausea, followed immediately by a cold, hard rage. They had turned a living, breathing creature into a pawn in their game of debt. "Let them try," I whispered to the empty room. "I am leaving the stage. Let's see what they do when the lights go out." The water at the Azure Vale Atoll was a shade of blue that did not seem real. It was transparent and calm, stretching out to the horizon like a sheet of turquoise glass. For the first time in 20 years, I slept without the aid of melatonin, lulled by the rhythmic lapping of the waves beneath the stilts of my overwater villa. Yet, even in paradise, I was working. My phone sat on the teak nightstand, fully charged and recording, a digital lifeline to the crime scene I had left behind in Providence Hills. I woke up at 6 in the morning, poured a glass of chilled water, and opened the security app on my tablet. The timestamp showed it was late evening back home. The camera in the study, which I had hidden between two encyclopedias, triggered a motion alert. Lila and Trent were in my house. I had explicitly told them I was locking the place up. Yet there they were, moving with the entitlement of squatters. Trent was kneeling in front of my filing cabinet, using a screwdriver to pry the lock on the bottom drawer. "This is ridiculous," Trent muttered. The audio crisp and clear through my earbuds. "Who locks a file cabinet inside their own house?" "Just open it," Lila said. She was standing by the desk, rifling through my mail. "She has to have the hard copy of the bonus agreement somewhere. If we get the account number, we can initiate the transfer authorization ourselves." Trent grunted, and the metal lock popped with a snap. He pulled the drawer open and started thumbing through my folders. "Babe, relax," Trent said, pulling out a thick file. "She is halfway around the world. She doesn't know a thing. She is probably staring at the ocean right now, sipping a cocktail, completely oblivious." I took a sip of my water, looking out at that very ocean. I felt no panic. I felt a strange, cold detachment, like a director watching actors fumble through a rehearsal. They were not my family anymore. They were subjects in an investigation. A notification from Nora popped up at the top of my screen. "Motion for temporary guardianship denied." The judge threw it out. "Cited lack of medical evidence. Watch out. They will try to manufacture some." I switched the audio feed to the kitchen camera. Lila was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. "Rebecca, hi. It's Lila, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen, I need a huge favor. Mom is, well, she is getting worse. We need to petition the court to help manage her finances, but we need witness statements. Can you come over for dinner when she gets back? I just need you to say that, well, that she forgot your name, or that she left the stove on. Just something to establish a pattern. I watched her pause, listening to the other end. No. You won't get in trouble, Lila insisted, her voice rising. It is for her own good. If we don't do this, she is going to lose everything. I closed the app. My hand was steady. They were recruiting my neighbors to gaslight me. Later that afternoon, I went to the resort's open-air lounge to clear my head. I sat at the bar, ordering a tonic water. Next to me sat a woman who looked to be in her 60s, wearing a linen suit that screamed old money and eyes that looked like they had seen everything. You have the face of a woman who is either planning a wedding or a lawsuit, the woman said, not looking up from her book. I turned to her. A lawsuit? Definitely a lawsuit. She chuckled and extended a hand. Jeanette Crow, former forensic accountant. I spent 30 years tracking assets for divorced CEOs. We got to talking. I kept the details vague. But Jeanette was sharp when I described the trust, the sudden reappearance of the daughter, and the isolation tactics. She nodded knowingly. It is called financial grooming. Honey, Jeanette said, swirling the ice in her glass. They isolate the victim, create a dependency, and then manufacture a crisis that only they can solve. Usually involves urgency. Sign this now or you lose the house. That sort of thing. They are using a lawyer named Kane. I mentioned casually. Jeanette stopped. She turned to look at me fully. Kane. As in Whitfield and Kane. Yes. My lawyer is Nora Whitfield, but the opposition seems to be using some paralegal connected to the firm's paperwork. Jeanette let out a low whistle. Small world. I used to consult for Nora. If Nora is your attorney, you are in good hands. But listen to me. If they are desperate enough to fabricate witness testimony, they are on a timeline. They have a debt coming due that you don't know about. They aren't waiting for you to die. Evelyn, they need you to be legally dead while you are still breathing. Her words hit me like a physical blow. It was not just greed, it was survival. They were drowning, and they intended to use my body as a raft. I thanked Jeanette and went back to my villa. I looked at the calendar. I was supposed to stay for 5 more days. I picked up my phone and dialed the airline. I need to change my ticket, I said. I need the first flight out tonight. Yes. I know it will cost extra. Just book it. I was not going to wait for them to set the stage for my return. I was going back now. I would walk through that door while they were still rehearsing their lies. And I would bring the curtain down on them myself. I unlocked the front door at 4 a.m. The house was pitch black, but the silence was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I did not turn on the lights. I moved through the shadows of my own hallway, guided by muscle memory and the faint grey light filtering through the transom windows. In the garage, Trent's luxury sedan was parked diagonally across 2 spaces, as if he had already claimed the deed to the property. It was a small act of dominance that made my blood run cold. Marlowe was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. He did not bark. He simply pressed his warm body against my legs, his tail thumping softly against the floorboards. Then, He turned and trotted urgently toward my home office, looking back to make sure I was following. He was pointing out the intrusion. I stepped into the office. The air smelled of ozone and stale cologne. On my mahogany desk, which I always left cleared, sat a sleek, portable laser printer that did not belong to me. Next to it was a stack of fresh paper. I picked up the top sheet. It was a practice run. Someone had been tracing my signature over and over again on a draft document titled General Durable Power of Attorney. The loops on the E were too wide, the slant of the H too aggressive. It was a crude forgery, but it was getting better near the bottom of the page. I did not scream. I did not tear the paper up. I carefully placed it back, exactly how I found it. I walked into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. The sound of the grinder was loud in the quiet house, a deliberate alarm clock. 10 minutes later, Lila appeared in the doorway. She was wearing one of my silk robes, her hair messy, her eyes wide with genuine shock. "Mom," she stammered, tightening the robe around her. Profound. How are you here?" I turned slowly, holding a steaming mug. I let my eyes drift past her, unfocused and hazy. "Leela," I asked, tilting my head. "Oh, honey, why are you back so early? I thought you and Trent were in—" "Where was it?" "Palm Cove." Lila froze. She looked at me, scanning for sarcasm, but I gave her nothing but confusion. "Mum, we have been staying here," she said slowly, stepping closer like one approaches a frightened animal. "We have been here for a week. Don't you remember Trent stumbled in behind her, looking disheveled and wary?" His eyes darted from me to the hallway leading to the office. He was wondering if I had seen the printer. "Oh," I said, letting out a breathy, vacant laugh. "Right, of course. The trip made me a little fuzzy. The doctor said the sea air would help my memory, but I think I mixed up the days." "You went to the Maldives." "Evelyn," Trent said, his voice sharp, testing me. "Did I?" I frowned, tapping my temple. I thought it was Florida, or maybe it was just a dream. It feels like a dream. Lila grabbed my shoulders, hugging me so tightly it felt like a restraint. "It is okay." "Mom," she cooed, looking over my shoulder at Trent. Her eyes were gleaming with predatory excitement. My confusion was their green light. "You are safe now. We are going to take care of everything." An hour later, the doorbell rang. It was Nora. She stood on the porch, holding a stack of veterinary pamphlets and a small, heavy black case. "Mrs. Hart." "I am so sorry to intrude," Nora said loudly, for the benefit of the audience inside. "I was driving by and saw the lights. I brought the updated vaccination records for Marlowe you asked for." Lila tried to block the door. "My mother is resting. She is very confused today. It will only take a second." I called out from the living room, waving Nora in. Nora bustled in, bypassing Lila. As she handed me the paperwork, she slipped a small USB drive into my palm. It contained the cloud backup software and a digital warrant she had prepared, ready to be executed. "Keep an eye on his diet," Nora said, squeezing my hand significantly. "And don't sign anything without reading the fine print." She left as quickly as she arrived. I went to the bathroom and checked my phone. A secure message from Miles had just come through. The trust isn't just a holding company. It is a debt vehicle. They are aggregating Trent's bad loans and Lila's credit card debt into the trust. If you sign that power of attorney and they transfer your assets into the trust, you don't just lose your money, you legally assume their debt. You will be on the hook for $400,000 in liabilities. I stared at the screen. They weren't just stealing from me. They were trying to bury me in their own grave. When I returned to the living room, Lila was beaming. She had set the table with my best china. "Mom, since you are back and, well, since we need to get things settled," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Trent and I thought we should have a special family dinner tonight. We will invite the neighbors, maybe the Millers and Rebecca. Just a nice evening to celebrate. Being together." "That sounds lovely," I said, smiling weakly. "And maybe," Trent added, his hands shaking slightly as he poured himself a drink at 10 in the morning, "we can handle a little paperwork after dessert, just to make sure you don't have to worry about the bills anymore." "A dinner party," I repeated. "Yes, let's do that." They thought they were setting the stage for my capitulation. They did not realize they were inviting witnesses to their own destruction. "That sounds wonderful, Leela," I said, smoothing the tablecloth with a hand that did not shake. In fact, I took the liberty of inviting a few old friends myself. Just a few people I met during my confusion. They were so helpful. I thought it would be nice to have a full house. Lila frowned, her eyes narrowing as she adjusted a vase of flowers. She did not like variables she could not control. "Who are they? We really wanted this to be intimate." "Mom, just family and close supporters." "Oh, just Mr. Vance and his associate," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "And my friend Nora. You will like them. They are very agreeable people." I did not mention that Mr. Vance was a certified notary public I had hired 2 hours ago, or that his associate was Miles Hargrove, the private investigator who had been tracking their debts. And Nora, of course, was coming not as a friend, but as legal counsel with a briefcase full of subpoenas. I walked over to where Marlowe was sleeping. I needed to set the hook deep. I knelt and scratched him behind the ears, making sure Lila was watching. "It is a shame about the paperwork," I said, loud enough for her to hear. "I really need to update his beneficiary information on the microchip registry. I completely forgot that his old policy has a survivor benefit. It is worth about $15,000 if anything happens to the owner." Lila stopped moving. The greed was instantaneous, a physical reflex that made her pupils dilate. "Wait," she said, stepping closer. "The dog has an insurance policy." "Oh, yes." I lied effortlessly. "But since the microchip is still pending update, I suppose the money is just sitting there. I should probably sign that transfer to you sooner rather than later so you can claim it." "We should do it now," Lila said, her voice tight with urgency. She reached into her purse and pulled out the folded document she had been hiding. "I have the transfer form right here. Just sign it. Mum. And I will handle the rest. I don't want you stressing over details." I looked at the pen she offered me. It was tempting to end it now, but the stage was not yet fully set. "No, dear," I said, standing up and brushing dog hair from my skirt. "Not on the coffee table. It is messy. We will do it at dinner. After the toast, it should be ceremonial, a passing of the torch." Lila hesitated, but she nodded. She put the paper back, thinking she had won. She did not know that in my bedroom. Inside my own leather portfolio lay a very different set of documents. I had a petition for immediate custody of Marlowe, based on abandonment, and a criminal complaint for forgery regarding the power of attorney. I went to my study to meet Miles, who had slipped in through the back door to set up the audio equipment. He handed me a single sheet of paper. "This is the bait. Miles whispered. It looks exactly like your bonus agreement from Kerridge and Blythe, but I altered 2 digits in the routing number and misspelled the CEO's name as Carriage. If they try to cash this or use it as proof of funds for a loan, the bank will flag it as a fraudulent document immediately. Leave it on the desk. I placed the document in the center of the blotter, a piece of cheese in a steel trap. Before the guests arrived, I made one final phone call to the veterinary clinic. The receptionist put Dr. Aris on the line. "Evelyn," he said. "I checked the logs again as you asked. The attempt to change the microchip to the trust happened 3 weeks ago. The person who called identified himself as Trent Grant. He provided his driver's license number for verification." "Thank you," I said. "That is all I needed." It was Trent. He was the architect, and Lila was the willing beneficiary. I hung up and sat on the floor with Marlowe one last time. The house was filling with the smell of roasting chicken, a domestic scent that felt like a lie. I held Marlowe's face in my hands. "You are just an excuse to them," I whispered to him. "But tonight, you will be the evidence." My phone buzzed with a notification from my credit card app. I frowned and opened it. A pending charge had just appeared. Time stamped 10 minutes ago. Emerald Horizon Realty. Deposit $25,000. I stopped breathing for a second. Lila had not just stolen my credit card information. She had used it to put a down payment on a house. She was already spending the bonus money she thought she would control by midnight. She was buying her future with the ashes of mine. I stood up. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked fragile, confused, and harmless. It was the perfect disguise. I sent a text to Nora, who was waiting in her car down the street. It was the signal we had agreed upon, the phrase that would initiate the takedown once everyone was seated. When I say the words, "today," I remember very clearly. "You come in." I put the phone in my pocket and walked out to the dining room. Lila was lighting the candles. "Everything looks perfect. Mom," she said. "Yes," I replied, smiling at the empty chairs where my executioners would soon sit. "It certainly does." The doorbell rang at 7 o'clock sharp. The family dinner was underway. Lila had invited the Millers from next door and a couple named Rebecca and Dave, whom she introduced as her dearest friends, though I had never met them. Then there was a man in a cheap suit, introduced as Mr. Kellen, a paperwork advisor, brought in to help with the administrative details. I welcomed them all, playing the part of the gracious but slightly befuddled hostess. I seated Nora to my right and Miles across from Trent. Lila looked at them suspiciously, but was too focused on her endgame to object. "I am so glad everyone could make it," Lila announced, raising her wineglass. "It has been a hard few months. Mom has been struggling a bit lately, just little things. Forgetting names, leaving the stove on." Trent nodded, his face a mask of concern. "We just want to make sure she is safe. It is scary when the memory starts to go." I looked down at my plate. Did I leave the stove on? Trent, I thought I was in Florida. See, Lila whispered loudly to Rebecca. "It is the Maldives." "Mom, you went to the Maldives." "Oh, right," I said, fumbling with my napkin until it dropped to the floor. "I am sorry. I seem to be clumsy tonight." "Rachel, could you pass the salt? It is Rebecca," the woman corrected gently, exchanging a pitying look with Lila. Lila seized the moment. She reached under her placemat and pulled out the document. "Mom, before we eat, let's just get this signed," she said, sliding the power of attorney across the table. "Mr. Kellen says it will just help us pay your bills while you rest. Just sign here." The room went silent. Everyone watched. I picked up the pen. I looked at the paper. Then I looked up, locking eyes with Lila. My expression shifted instantly. The fog cleared from my eyes, replaced by a gaze of absolute clarity. "You know, Lila," I said, my voice steady and cold. I might have forgotten where I put my keys once or twice. But today I remember very clearly. It was the signal. Nora stood up immediately. She did not say a word. She simply turned her laptop around to face the table and hit the spacebar. The large television mounted on the wall behind me flickered to life. It was not a cable channel. It was a security feed from my home office, time-stamped 3 days ago. On the screen, Trent was kneeling by my filing cabinet, prying it open with a screwdriver. The audio was crisp. "She is halfway around the world. She doesn't know a thing." The guests gasped. Trent dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. The video cut to the kitchen. Lila was pacing. "I need a huge favor. I just need you to say that she forgot your name. We need to petition the court." Rebecca turned pale and shrank back in her chair. "What is this?" Lila stammered, standing up. "This is—" "You recorded us, I did," I said. "Every minute?" "It is out of context." Rebecca cried out. I didn't agree to anything. Miles Hargrove leaned forward. He placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed play. Lila's voice filled the room again, sharp and demanding. "If we don't do this, she is going to lose everything. Just tell the judge she is senile." "That sounds like context to me," Miles said. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the veterinary records. I slid them toward Mr. Kellen. "And this," I said, pointing to the highlighted text, "the microchip for the dog. Transferred to the Grant Family Trust, a trust used to shield assets from debt collectors. You didn't leave Marlowe here because you were going on vacation? Lila, you left him here because he is collateral on a loan you are defaulting on." I dialed a number on my phone and put it on speaker. "Harbour Light Animal Care. This is Dr. Aris." The voice boomed. "Dr. Aris, can you confirm who attempted to change the registration on Marlowe's chip?" I asked. "It was Trent Grant," Dr. Aris said. He provided his driver's license number ending in 442. Trent slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses jump. "You are ruining this family," he shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "We are trying to save everything. You are selfish. You have all this money coming in, and you won't even help your own children help." I stood up. "You tried to have me declared incompetent. That isn't asking for help. Trent, that is a hostile takeover. Family helps family," he yelled. "Family," I said, my voice cutting through his noise like a blade. "Does not need forged signatures to exist. Mr. Vance." The quiet man in the corner whom I had introduced as a friend stood up. He pulled a badge from his pocket. "I am a notary public," Mr. Vance said, "and I have examined the draft document you prepared. Mr. Kellen, the witness signatures on the previous page are traced. That is a felony." He turned to the paperwork advisor. "And you, sir, are currently under a cease and desist order from the state bar for practicing law without a license. I recognized you the moment I walked in." Mr. Kellen grabbed his briefcase and bolted for the door without a word. Lila looked around the room. The neighbors were staring at her with horror. Her friends were looking at the floor. Her plan lay in shreds on my dining table. She turned on me, her eyes wild with panic and rage. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You stole him!" she screamed, pointing at the dog sleeping in the corner. "You kidnapped my dog. I am calling the police. I will tell them you refused to give him back." The room held its breath. I picked up my wineglass and took a slow sip. I smiled, and it was the only genuine smile I had shown all night. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Call them. I am waiting." The flashing blue lights of the Providence Hills Civil Response Unit washed over my living room walls, turning the pale yellow paint into a cold, clinical grey. Lila had called them thinking she was the victim, but when the officers stepped through the door, Nora met them not with a defense, but with a prosecution. She handed the lead officer a thick binder. "Officers, before you take a statement regarding the animal, I suggest you review this," Nora said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "It contains a sworn affidavit regarding the forgery of a power of attorney, video evidence of the intent to defraud a senior citizen, and a digital trail of identity theft." Lila tried to push past the officer, reaching for the leash. "They are lying," she shrieked. "That is my dog. I want him back." Now I stepped forward, holding a single sheet of paper stamped with the seal of the county court. "You cannot take him," I said calmly. "This is a temporary emergency custody order granted by Judge Miller this afternoon. It states that due to documented abandonment and medical neglect, specifically the untreated injury you tried to hide, Marlowe is currently under my legal care. If you try to remove him, you will be in violation of a court order." Lila froze. She looked at Trent, desperate for him to fix it. But Trent was busy trying to save himself. Miles stepped into the circle, holding up a tablet. "And just so the officers understand the motive," Miles said, looking directly at Trent, "the Grant Family Trust isn't a savings account. It is a debt shield. If Mrs. Hart had signed those papers, she would have legally assumed responsibility for over $400,000 in bad loans and defaulted credit lines. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a financial hit job." The paperwork advisor, who had been detained by the second officer near the door, started hyperventilating. "I was just a consultant," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Trent. "He paid me $5,000 to draft the competency hearing papers. He said she was practically comatose." Trent turned on Lila with the ferocity of a trapped animal. "You said she would sign it," Trent shouted, sweat dripping down his forehead. "You said she was weak. This was your plan." "Lila, you told me to print the papers." Lila screamed back, her face twisted in ugly rage. "You are the one who is broke. You are the one facing jail time for fraud." "Enough," I said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. Nora tapped a key on her laptop, and the television screen behind me changed. It displayed a screenshot of an email confirmation. "Receipt for deposit Emerald Horizon Realty. Amount $25,000. Payment method Visa, ending in 8812. The room went deadly silent. That was my credit card number. "You didn't just want my future money," I said. "You stole from me today. You used my card to buy a house you can't afford, hoping the bonus would cover it before I noticed." Lila's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The denial died in her throat. I walked up to her. I stood close enough to smell the expensive perfume she had bought with money she did not have. Con? I started, then corrected myself. Lila, you didn't abandon the dog. You abandoned your conscience. Mom, please, she whispered, tears finally forming, though I knew they were for herself, not for me. We were desperate. We can fix this. No, I said. You can't. The officers asked Trent and Lila to step outside. Nora handed the police a restraining order she had successfully filed alongside the custody petition, effectively barring them from the property. As the officer guided Lila out the door, she turned back one last time. Her face was a mask of spite. Fine, keep the damn house, she spat. But you will be all alone in it. You will be miserable and lonely, and no one will care when you die. I looked at her, and I felt absolutely nothing. No pain, no regret. Just the lightness of a burden being lifted. Solitude doesn't kill me. Lila, I said, greed is what will kill you. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing out the noise and the flashing lights. I turned back to the room. Nora was packing up her laptop. Miles gave me a respectful nod. Marlowe trotted over and sat on my feet, looking up with adoring eyes. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of tea. It was still warm. I opened my laptop, but not to check my bank account. I went to the travel website. I booked a ticket to the Maldives, first class. Departure in 48 hours. But this time, I was not going to run away or to hide. I was going because I had survived the storm, and I deserved to see the sun. I looked out the window at the empty driveway where their car used to be. I whispered to the reflection in the glass. A final verdict delivered to the ghosts of the family I once thought I had. I lost everything once. Because of that, you have nothing left to take from me. Thanks so much for listening to this story. I am really curious to know where you guys are tuning in from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below, because I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed watching, justice gets served cold. Please make sure to subscribe to the Nora Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Catch you in the next one.